The winter haze of 1944 clung to the snow-covered forests near the German border, thick enough to hide an army. 4 months, the forces of the Third Reich had operated under a comfortable illusion. Their propaganda assured them that the American army was soft, divided, and incapable of matching the technological superiority of German steel. A battle-hardened panzer commander, secure within the thick armor of his Mark IV tank, was conducting what he believed to be a routine patrol. He had faced many enemies on the Eastern Front and in France, and he expected this encounter to be no different. He scans the seemingly empty landscape, confident that no American unit would dare to advance in this weather. Then, the wind shifts. The mist begins to clear, revealing a terrifying silhouette on the ridge above. It is not the retreating shape of a defeated force. It is the boxy, aggressive form of an American Sherman tank, its gun turret already turning. And painted in white, prominent on the side, is a roaring Black Panther insignia. The German commander barely has time to register the unexpected emblem before the Sherman opens fire with brutal, accurate fury. The round smashes into the Panzer's engine, instantly disabling it. Other Panthers emerge from the tree line, not in stealth, but with terrifying, relentless speed, creating a chaotic symphony of engine roars and cannon fire. The German patrol is overwhelmed in seconds. Panic, a feeling long forgotten by these elite troops, begins to spread. They were prepared to fight the soft Americans they had been told about. But this unit, with its strange emblem and savage aggression, is something else entirely. For the German army, this encounter marked the violent shattering of their illusions. They had just met the most feared armored unit on the European continent, and their nightmare was only beginning. Before we dive into the incredible origins of this unit, I want to take a quick second. If you are riding along with us and appreciate these raw, unfiltered stories from military history, drop the words Black Panthers down in the comments. It is always great to see the real history buffs in the crowd and know who is paying attention. Now, let us go back to where this storm was truly brewing. To understand the fury of the 761st Tank Battalion, you have to understand the crucible that forged them. Long before they shattered German armor in the freezing European winter, they fought a completely different war on their own soil. The year is 1942. Deep in the sweltering heat of Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, the men of the 761st are training. They are volunteers, eager to fight for a nation that forces them to sit at the back of the bus and eat in segregated mess halls. At this time, the United States military was strictly divided by race. Official War College reports from the 1920s outrageously claimed that African American soldiers lacked the intelligence, courage, and quick reflexes required for modern, mechanized warfare. The military establishment fully expected them to fail. They were given outdated equipment and largely treated as an experiment. But the men of the 761st turned that prejudice into high-octane fuel. They knew that any mistake would be used to justify the racist policies of the era. So, they trained with a punishing intensity. They mastered their Sherman tanks until they became extensions of their own bodies. They fired faster, drove harder, and bonded tighter than almost any other unit in the army. They adopted the Black Panther as their insignia, and their motto was simple but heavy: "Come out fighting." They were not just preparing to defeat the Axis powers, they were preparing to defeat an entire system of beliefs back home. By the time they shipped out, they were a coiled spring of lethal efficiency, forged in the fires of friendly fire and institutional doubt. By November 1944, the Allied war machine in Europe was grinding to a bloody halt. The rapid advance across France had stretched supply lines to the breaking point, and the brutal winter was setting in. General George S. Patton, commanding the mighty Third Army, was bleeding men and tanks against a hardened German defense. Patton was a man of complex contradictions, known for his harsh discipline and old-world prejudices, but above all, he was a commander obsessed with winning. He needed armor, and he did not care where it came from. When the 761st arrived in France, they were assigned to Patton's command. On a freezing, overcast morning, Patton stood before the men of the 761st, who were standing at rigid attention in the European mud. He looked at the sea of black faces and delivered a speech that would become legendary. "Men, you are the first Negro tankers to ever fight in the American Army. I would never have asked for you if you were not good. I have nothing but the best in my army. I do not care what color you are, so long as you go up there and kill those Kraut sons of bitches. Everyone has their eyes on you and is expecting great things from you. Most of all, your race is looking forward to you. Do not let them down, and damn you, do not let me down. The tension in the air was electric. As Patton drove away, the reality of their situation settled over the battalion. The proving ground was behind them. The roar of the V8 tank engines firing up drowned out the lingering doubts. The smell of diesel fuel and impending violence filled the cold air. The men of the 761st buttoned up their hatches and rolled toward the front lines. They were finally being unleashed, and the German army had absolutely no idea what was coming for them. November 1944. The French town of Morville-les-Vicq sat like a fortress in the bitter cold. This was the baptism of fire for the Black Panthers. The German defenders were dug in deep, supported by heavy artillery and anti-tank guns perfectly camouflaged in the tree lines. As the 761st advanced across the open, freezing ground, the world exploded. Artillery shells rained down, turning the frozen earth into a chaotic nightmare of mud and flying shrapnel. But instead of halting or pulling back to regroup, which is exactly what the German commanders expected from an untested unit, the Black Panthers stepped on the gas. They charged directly into the teeth of the enemy fire. The roar of their engines terrified the entrenched infantry. It was in this hellscape that legends were forged in real time. Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers, commanding the lead Sherman tank, hit an anti-tank mine. The explosion shredded his tank's tracks and blew a massive, horrifying hole through his leg, slicing right down to the bone. Medics rushed through the gunfire to pull him out, telling him his war was over and he had a guaranteed ticket home. But Rivers refused the morphine. He refused the stretcher. Bleeding heavily and in agonizing pain, he grabbed the medical officer, looked him dead in the eye, and told him he was not going anywhere. Rivers dragged himself over to another functioning tank, climbed inside the turret, and took command. For the next several days, Rivers led the armored charge, directing fire and destroying fortified German positions while his leg slowly turned gangrenous inside his boot. This was the terrifying new reality the Axis forces were suddenly facing. These were not just regular soldiers following standard tactical doctrine. These were men fighting with an unbelievable, almost reckless aggression, determined to tear through the enemy lines at the absolute cost of their own lives. Morville-les-Vicq fell under the weight of their advance, and the German army learned their first, extremely bloody lesson about what happens when you underestimate the 761st. This brutal introduction at Morville-les-Vicq was just the beginning, and it revealed a terrifying pattern to the German high command. When other Allied units took heavy casualties, standard military doctrine dictated a tactical withdrawal to regroup, assess the damage, and wait for reinforcements. It was a logical, expected rhythm of war. The German defensive strategy relied on this pause. They would inflict massive damage, force the Americans back, and use that time to reinforce their own lines. But the 761st broke that rhythm completely. When the Black Panthers took fire, when they saw their own men fall, they did not retreat. They accelerated. They used the chaos of the battlefield to push forward with a shocking, relentless aggression that defied every textbook the Wehrmacht had studied. They turned their Shermans into blunt instruments of trauma. The Germans, initially confident in their superior Panther and Tiger tanks, found themselves completely overwhelmed by this sheer force of will. Intercepted German radio transmissions from the front lines began to paint a picture of absolute dread. Commanders were frantically reporting that these Schwarz Panther simply would not stop shooting. Even when their tanks were hit and disabled, the crews would bail out, grab their Thompson submachine guns and bazookas, and fight as infantry right there in the mud, refusing to yield an inch of ground. The psychological terror of facing an enemy that simply ignored the accepted rules of engagement was devastating. The German infantry, already exhausted and freezing, realized that the Black Panthers viewed every encounter not as a tactical maneuver, but as a personal crusade. They fought with a white-hot fury, a deep-seated determination forged by the injustice they faced back home, and they were unleashing it entirely on the Axis lines. It was not just about winning a battle anymore, it was about destroying the enemy's will to fight entirely. This relentless drive would soon be tested in the most brutal conditions imaginable. December 1944. The Ardennes Forest. The Battle of the Bulge. Hitler had launched a massive, desperate counteroffensive, a massive armored thrust through the snow-choked forests, catching the Allies completely off guard. The weather was a nightmare. Blizzards grounded Allied air support, temperatures plummeted well below freezing, and the American lines were buckling under the weight of German panzers. Elements of the 101st Airborne Division were completely surrounded and trapped in the town of Bastogne, facing total annihilation. Patton, desperate to break the siege, ordered his Third Army to perform an incredible 90-degree turn in the middle of a winter storm and attack the German flank. He needed his hardest hitters at the point of the spear. The 761st answered the call. The conditions were monstrous. Tanks slid off icy roads into ditches. Men suffered severe frostbite, their feet turning black and useless inside freezing boots. Engine blocks cracked from the cold. But they kept pushing. 4 agonizing, sleepless days, the Black Panthers fought a grinding, brutal war of attrition against elite German panzer divisions. They were facing the monstrous Tiger tanks, machines that heavily outgunned and out-armored their Shermans. In these tight, snow-blinded engagements, survival depended entirely on speed, raw courage, and the absolute refusal to quit. They engaged in point-blank armored brawls, maneuvering their lighter tanks through the deep snow to hit the heavily armored German beasts from the side or the rear. They fought through roadblocks, minefields, and ambushes, bleeding heavily but never stopping their advance. The 761st became the hammer that smashed the southern shoulder of the German salient, fighting with a ferocity that helped relieve Bastogne and ultimately broke the back of Hitler's last great offensive in the West. But the war was not over, and the Black Panthers were not stopping. By the spring of 1945, they faced the Siegfried Line, a massive defensive wall of concrete pillboxes and anti-tank obstacles known as Dragon's Teeth protecting the German homeland. The 761st became the tip of the spear that pierced this supposedly impenetrable fortress. They blasted through concrete and steel, pushing deep into enemy territory. But nothing could have prepared them for what they found as they drove further into Austria. In May 1945, elements of the 761st helped liberate the Gunskirchen concentration camp. The hardened tank crews, men who had seen the absolute worst of combat, broke down at the sight of thousands of starving, dying prisoners. The profound irony of that moment was inescapable. Here were African-American soldiers, men who were treated as second-class citizens in their own country, men who had been told they were inferior, tearing down the gates of a regime built entirely on the horrific lie of racial supremacy. They shared their rations, their clothes, and their tears with the survivors. The liberators and the liberated found a profound, silent understanding in the ashes of the Third Reich. This grueling, bloody march across Europe came with a staggering human cost, but it also cemented a legacy that is almost impossible to comprehend. The 761st Tank Battalion fought for 183 continuous days in combat. Let that sink in. Most armored units were rotated off the front lines after a week or two to rest and repair. The Black Panthers just kept fighting, day after day, through 6 European countries, without a single break. They inflicted thousands of casualties on the enemy, captured dozens of towns, and destroyed a staggering amount of Axis military hardware. Yet, when the guns finally fell silent, their own country was slow to recognize their superhuman achievements. It took decades of fighting through red tape and enduring prejudice before the unit received the Presidential Unit Citation, and before heroes like Reuben Rivers were posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. But the men of the 761st did not fight for medals. They fought to prove a point to the world. They were the unstoppable force that shattered the myth of Aryan supremacy with high-explosive shells and raw, unbreakable courage. That is exactly why the Axis hated fighting the 761st Tank Battalion more than any other unit. They were not just fighting soldiers, they were fighting men who had absolutely nothing left to lose, and a whole world to prove wrong.